we can get to the fourth turning at some point, because as you explained, and as I sort of attempted to articulate at the beginning, you've really got kind of this dual approach, one of which is a very systematic one. And those indicators aren't a function of anything like a qualitative analysis, such as a fourth turning regime, but yet they're both important. And so maybe that's kind of a critical thing to talk about, is how do you reconcile those, particularly when you get, say, the macro fourth turning stuff telling you something very different than what your indicators are showing you.
Yeah, 100%. And then absolutely. So let's start with the fourth turning. And as we sort of get to those slides, I'll start by saying a lot of what we built through 42 macro is really just a function of me observing what our buy side clients were doing best. The guys that wind up, staying in their seats for the longest periods of time, the guys that had the best performance, guys and gals that had the best performance over long periods of time. This is sort of what I've noticed them traditionally doing. This is the process. A lot of what you see from a systematic signaling standpoint is a lot of what I've observed them doing. And then obviously we layer on our fundamental research to, again, help clients build or erode confidence in the evolution of our signals. One of the most important topics that we've talked about over the past year plus, so really since last summer, is the concept that we are, as investors, investing in a fourth turning regime. I don't think we have enough time to sort of go into the nitty gritty on what a fourth turning entails, but for those who may be unfamiliar, it's a sort of it's an economic theory based on generational sort of archetypes that sort of suggests that every length of a long human life or so, right around 80 to 100 years, we have a transitional period of great social upheaval in societies whereby legacy institutions are thrown to the wayside. They're replaced by more community focused institutions, and a lot of times in that process, you typically have a lot of inflation. You typically have a lot of public sector debt growth. You typically have total wars. There's a lot of consistent features of these sort of fourth turning regimes, of which going back to the analysis that my former colleague and one of my mentors, Neil House, performed with his late partner, Bill Strauss, they've identified, I want to say, 5 or 6 historical fourth turnings going backwards into the mid 1400s. So there's a pretty consistent typical pattern of how this stuff has occurred in Anglo-American history, and we are in one of those sort of great upheaval periods now. And obviously that has significant implications if you're a human being living in a fourth turning, very much so, certainly as a new father, but it will also have significant implications as an investor. And so the first thing you have to think about is, okay, if you're in a fourth turning, what does that mean ultimately from the monetary and fiscal policy maker reaction functions, and ultimately how their policies are going to impact the economy? Because ultimately that's where the biggest sort of influences are going to come as it relates to asset markets. So we'll start with the fiscal policy risk. We did a big deep dive study studying, I want to say, about 50 to 60 independent time series spanning data as far back as we can get the data, in most cases about 200-300 years of data, to identify a couple things. One, is there a sort of consistent direction of travel for the particular indicator in a forward turning, and then also what is that consistent direction of travel? Do we typically see an explosive jump condition in some of these key indicators of the economy, of asset markets, of policy? And the answer is yes, having performed that analysis. So for example, if you think about the fiscal policy risks that investors are likely to observe in a fourth turning, you're talking about explosive growth in sovereign deficits, debts, the size of government, and the cost to finance the deficit. That's the typical pattern that we've observed in these fourth turnings. You can sort of see this here when we show the analysis in time series format and the statistical format. What we found is, so the chart on the left just shows the time series of the particular indicator with data going back to the 1800s with the fourth turning regimes highlighted in red. And then the chart on the right just shows the statistical properties of the time series, and the baseline of first, second, and third turnings. That's the white space in the chart on the left, and the fourth turnings, which is the red space on the chart of the left, looking at the median, max, min, and interquartile ranges. And what we found, one of the most salient takeaways, David, in this analysis we performed is that we typically see a significant deterioration in the sovereign fiscal balance in fourth turnings. I mean, that's been a consistent pattern, and we're already sort of halfway into this fourth turning with already a significant deterioration in the sovereign fiscal balance, a couple of already. And on the other side of that, what we know is that sovereign debt tends to increase sharply in fourth turnings on the other side of that. And so we are in an era of accelerated public sector debt growth that is likely to be a confluence of a few things. One of those things that we believe is populism. Populism. There's sort of two reasons why sovereign debt grow significantly faster relative to trend in a fourth turning. Number one is populism, and number two is you typically have a complete mobilization of public sector resources, in the climax phase of the fourth turning,